We're going to look there in Genesis, the first book of the Bible, so that shouldn't be very difficult to find. The first book of the Bible in Genesis, and we're going to read some verses there to begin our lesson this morning. Genesis chapter 4 and verse 1 and following. And Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. And she bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering, but unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. And the Lord said unto Cain, Why art thou wroth, and why is thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. And Cain talked with Abel his brother. And it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother, and slew him. The word slew always means violently kill. As we consider our topic this morning of anger, when anger calls, I want us to consider the actual seriousness and the power that anger has in the lives of individuals. I've been running through some statistics, and I found one statistic that says that over 100 million Americans are under or in some type of anger management program. So this is not a slight and light subject. This is a subject that is very, very serious, and it is very up to date. It is very cultural. So anger, as we consider it then, is a subject we need to put some time into, because the fact is we all know what anger is. We have all experienced anger. Yeah, I've done some counseling in anger management, and I've found that every individual is different. But the anger is always the same. I've been able to help some, and I've not been able to help others, because it all depends on the individual. Anger is a raw and basic emotion. All humans are equipped with the instinctive capacity for anger. Anger is a signal that tells us that something is not right. In its root form, it shows up whenever we are blocked from achieving an important goal to us. When something we desire does not happen, we experience anger, simple or complex. Anger can keep us from maturing and becoming healthy people. Bad anger is an intense, negative, not necessarily hostile feeling that comes when the person runs into obstacles that keep him or her from getting things to go his or her way, when the ends are selfish and self-serving. The person that suffers the immediate brunt of this powerful raw emotion may be completely mistaken as to its origin. In fact, most people who struggle with anger have very deep emotional problems that have never been resolved. They have only been suppressed and hidden in a vault that has no secure lock on it. That's why when things go contrary to what that individual desires, the unresolved anger springs to the surface and demands attention. The majority of the cases show that the individual has cyclical moments of explosive anger. There are several causes of most anger struggles, and I will name 5 for you today, or 4 at least. First, there's guilt. Guilt can cause anger. Unresolved guilt feelings create frustrated anger. And then there's the sense of inferiority. It includes the lack of self-respect, what they now call self-esteem, due to the feeling of failure or a sense of not having accomplished satisfactory goals in life. It is a disappointed spirit. Then there's fear. This can lead to paranoia. This is the kind of fear that causes insecurity. And then there's what's called agoraphobia. And it's the kind of fear that leads to isolation. It comes from the unhealed experiences of being rejected and abused. And neurosis is usually a condition common to persons suffering from hidden fears. Then you have trauma at the root of anger. This condition has many causes, but it often leaves the individual in a psychotic condition. It can even cause a distortion of personality, a sort of schizophrenia. And some of us have read the story on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That was a theme. And then there's pain. The pain is emotional and usually shows up in the body in some form of disease or illness. Many physical diseases are derived from emotional diseases, and many of those come from anger. So as we can see, anger is a dangerous culprit to have in the backyard of our souls. It will cause many problems, sometimes terminal problems. I was reading the other day in one of the reports about the traffic rage that occurs on a daily basis in most big cities. In one city, there was this cement blockade where they're working on the road and the lines get clogged up. And one man had waited for over an hour in line, and right when he's about to get his turn to get through the blockage, some fella in a car comes running through the side of the road, almost off the road, over everyone, and then just shoots in front of him. And according to the reports, he turned back at him and made a smirk smile at him, almost mocking him. So the man followed this man to the next light, got off his car, and shot the other man to death. Road rage. You see, anger is serious. And if it gets out of control, it will destroy. When anger takes its toll, it leads to more anger. It kills joy, it annihilates peace, and it ends in misery. There is no environment as miserable as an environment that is plagued with angry people. As we can see in our text today, anger can become hatred and lead to very deadly thinking and actions. Here you have a man killing his own brother in a violent act of anger. So let us look at some definition. First of all, according to the Hebrew and Greek words and the dictionaries that speak of the words of anger in the Bible, they range from displeasure to intense rage. It implies a deep burning within. It's an intense indignation. When referring to wrath, which is what we have in our text this morning, it literally means to glow as coal or white glow of peak heat. In fact, I read the Hebrew text, and the Hebrew text literally reads this way, and glowed Cain greatly. That is the expression, what is translated, he was wroth, very wroth. He glowed greatly, it says. And it's amazing because when you see that, you realize that God sees the color of the soul. Every virtue, every vice, every characteristic is displayed before God in manners we can neither see nor comprehend. He knows who we are, and He knows what we are. He sees what's happening in our spirits and our souls all the time. I'll read you a few quotations here. One man said, "Those who hate you don't win unless you hate them, and then you destroy yourself." Another said, it is the wrong action taken on anger that leads to sin and disaster." And Will Rogers said, some of the older folk remember Will Rogers, it is wrong, he says, when you fly into a rage, you seldom make a safe landing. And then another one said, I got so angry, I gave him a piece of my mind, and it was a piece that I could not afford to lose. So first of all, remember, anger becomes sin when it feeds our selfish desires or goals. We allow anger to fuel something that is usually selfish. Revenge, jealousy, and resentment are the life of anger in different modes and expressions. Anger can become an addictive sense of power and dominance when things do not go our way. It can actually become a form of manipulation over others, especially in the home. Anger is one of the devil's most successful devices for distorting our character. 2 Corinthians 2:11 says, "To whom you forgive anything, I forgive also. For if I forgave anything, to whom I forgave it, for your sakes, forgave it I in the person of Christ." Lest, the word lest means to prevent, because there is a tremendous fear that this might happen. He says, lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. And anger is one of his masterpieces. When we do not identify anger and we allow it to creep in on us, it will always overwhelm us and cause the most regrettable reactions and actions. As we move on, let me read to you a litany of Bible passages on the subject of anger. It is not comprehensive, but I think you will get the point. Here we go. Genesis 49, verse 5. Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come thou into their secret, unto their assembly mine honor. Be not thou united, for in their anger they slew a man. In fact, they slew an entire city. And in their self-will they digged down a wall. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Psalms 37, verse 8. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not thyself in any wise to do evil, for evildoers shall be cut off, but those that wait on the Lord, they will inherit the earth. Psalm 106:32. They angered him also at the waters of strife, so that it went ill with Moses for their sakes. Speaking of Moses, because they provoked his spirit, so that he spake unadvisedly with his lips. Moses reacted in anger. Proverbs 12, verse 16. A fool's wrath is presently known, but a prudent man covereth shame. Proverbs 14, verse 17. He that is soon angry dealeth foolishly, and a man of wicked devices is hated. Proverbs 16:32. He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit than he that taketh a city. Proverbs 19, verse 19. A man of great wrath shall suffer punishment, for if thou deliver him, yet thou must do it again. Proverbs 22, verse 8. He that soweth iniquity shall reap vanity, and the rod of his anger shall fail. And then Proverbs 22, verse 24. Make no friendship with an angry man, with a furious man thou shalt not go, lest thou learn his ways and get a snare to thy soul. Proverbs 27:4. Wrath is cruel, and anger is outrageous, but who is able to stand before envy? Proverbs 29:22. An angry man stirreth up strife, and a furious man abundeth in transgression. Ecclesiastes 7:9. Be not hasty in thy spirit to be angry, for anger resteth in the bosom of fools. Amos. Now remember, the word bosom of something in the Old Testament always means a mentality. The mentality of a fool is one of explosive anger. Amos 1:11, thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Edom, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because he did pursue his brother with the sword, and did cast off all pity, and in his anger did tear perpetually, and he kept his wrath forever. And then in the New Testament, Matthew chapter 5, verse 22. But I say unto you that whoever is angry with his brother, this refers to holding a grudge, without a cause, shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever shall say to his brother, Raka, these are words of anger. The word Raka means worthless one, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hell. These are words of anger. And in 2 Corinthians 12:20, for I fear lest when I come I shall not find you such as I would, and that I'll be found unto you such as you would not, lest there be debates, envyings, wraths, strifes, backbitings, swellings, tumults. All these can be categorized under one title: anger. Ephesians 4, verse 26. Be ye angry and sin not. What's he saying? You're going to be angry. We know that. But don't you dare sin on it. Be angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down upon your wrath, neither give place to the devil. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and all evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. And verse 32, and be ye kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. Colossians 3, verse 8, but now you also put off all these: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth. I can't help but see a progression out of this. It begins with anger and ends up with what you'd say. You see? And you usually lose all scruples in the process. 1 Timothy 2, verse 8, I will therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. Titus 1, verse 7, for a bishop must be blameless as the steward of God, not self-willed, not soon angry, not given to wine nor striker, not given to filthy lucre. You see, angry people are strikers, and many times they turn to alcohol. That is a fact of life. It's the only way to deal with it, but it does not cure it. And James says, wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. These select verses should leave a clear impression on us of the serious implications of the impulsive and undisciplined management of anger. Anger is destructive when we feed on it. Read the life of King Saul, for example. You'll discover that the process of his ultimate fall and destruction began with the irresistible urgings of envy toward David and was inflamed by the fuel of impulsive anger. It drove him insane. In fact, it says that he was so bad off, an evil spirit would come and visit him. Anger destroys relationships. Please pay attention to this one. Anger destroys relationships. Wherever anger lives, love is injured and happiness dies. Wherever anger lives, love is injured and happiness dies. Managing anger in relationships requires a well-planned strategy. After years of struggling with anger and endless matrimonial battles, one couple decided how they would handle their anger, and the strategy saved their marriage. So I think this is good to listen to. I'll read it. It's not anger itself that has moral implications, it's how you handle it. You must decide to change the established patterns. Learning to discharge your anger in non-destructive ways brings life and vitality to your marriage. First, express your own feelings instead of hurling blame and launching a character assassination assault against your mate. Second, use preambles for introducing heavy topics. You can say something like, this is not something you need to fix, I just need to talk about my feelings. That gives the other person a chance to begin listening in a focused, non-destructive way. Third, increase your critical interval, the time between a stimulus and a response. Simply delay your response until you have fully recuperated your objectivity. In other words, cool down before you start. Finally, the most important, make up. When the dust settles, you've heard each other out, get forgiveness into the picture. And when forgiving one another is difficult, stop to consider the alternative: prolonged loneliness and lingering bitterness and resentment. Pray together about the matter and forgive and accept each other without conditions. You know, many say that in the matrimonial battles, the individuals first get historical and then they get hysterical. 1 Peter 3:7 says this to you who respect God and His Word and your relationship with Him. Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. You see, God has placed your spouse right there with you as the closest image and representation of Himself to deal with. And if you're going to be angry and bitter with your spouse, what are you doing praying to God? So that is a challenge to deal with anger in relationships. You'll find that the same principles apply to any relationship. If we learn to appreciate other people and understand their position, we might not be angry at them at all. We often react to people in anger without understanding their situation. We may not have all the facts or be ignorant of the context of their situation. Always try to be aware. Have a positive attitude. Having a positive attitude toward others helps exercise self-control and respect toward them. Having been called to live a life of truthfulness, honesty, integrity, and compassion, we must watch how we treat each other because it is vitally important. And as we begin to conclude this evening, I want to, first of all, state this. When something we desire does not happen, anger calls. Simple or complex? Simple means it's for the moment and it'll go away. Complex means this is going to settle in and it's going to take years to deal with. It comes rushing like a torrent of sea waves. It can prevent our spiritual transformation and destroy our ability to grow and mature, both psychologically and spiritually. Anger creates a cycle of reaction-based events in our minds, in our emotions, in our wills, and in our lives. It will assault all our relationships and twist and distort our capacity to perceive reality. When anger comes to your home, you must already have a well-planned, thought-out, and determined method on how to handle that anger. Especially if you know you struggle with anger. Do not handle anger without a plan of action. You will usually have the wrong reaction and end in failure. Even when you win, you will lose. When anger calls, ask yourself then, at that moment, will I let Jesus shape my heart at this moment? There's a little poem I want to share with you in closing. It's called Tell Him. The little sharp vexations and the briars that cut the feet, why not take all to the helper who has never failed as yet? Tell him about the heartache. And tell him the longings too. Tell him the baffled purpose when we scarce know what to do. Then, leaving all our weakness with the one divinely strong, forget that we bore the burden and carry away the song. You can do that with anger in Jesus Christ. So in closing, here are the questions. What is your struggle today? How are you handling anger in your life? Have you taken that to the Lord? Have you taken it to the cross? Have you given your life to Jesus Christ that he can help you manage your anger when anger calls? Anger is a raw and basic emotion. Even animals feel anger. It is part of the physical nature of all living creatures. But anger in all humans is a real characteristic. We are all equipped with the instinctive capacity to anger. Anger is a signal that tells us that something is not right. It's rooted in our emotions. And in its root form, it shows up whenever we're blocked from achieving an important goal to us. When something we desire does not happen, we experience anger. Simple or complex. By simple, we meant it can be momentary and taken care of, or it's complex. It can be something that will stay for us for many years and lead to other complications. Anger can keep us from maturing and becoming healthy people. As we said, bad anger is an intense, negative, not necessarily hostile feeling that comes when the person runs into obstacles that keep him or her from getting things to go his or her own way, and the ends are selfish and self-serving. So the person that suffers the immediate brunt of this powerful raw emotion may be completely mistaken as to its origin. In fact, most people who struggle with anger have very deep emotional problems that have never been resolved. They have only been suppressed and hidden in a vault that has no secure lock in it. And that's why when things go contrary to what that individual desires, the unresolved anger springs to the surface and demands attention. And in the majority of cases, it's shown that the individual has cyclical moments of explosive anger. There are people who go through the world with a chip on their shoulder, as one might call it. It's interesting because I was hearing in the news a couple of hours ago, and I didn't get a very clear picture. I sort of caught it, side ears, as one would say. But it was something about some man killing his family members and then killing himself and burning himself down in the place he was in. And to this point, it's reported that everyone around them that don't understand what happened. Have no idea what happened that caused all this. But obviously, there were moments of anger, and several people died. We mentioned about the man who was trying to drive through those usual blockades in big cities where the traffic gets congested and you have to wait 1 or 2 hours to just get through one lane, and how that one of these men explained to the police when he was arrested that he had been sitting there over an hour in the line, and some fella came over with one of these speedy cars or came off the side of the road around everyone, and just right when he had that little opening to get in, this fella just squished in there and looked back at him with a smirk, according to himself. So he followed into the next light, got off, and shot him to death. Anger. is serious. Anger is dangerous. Anger can be destructive. I want us to see this incident in the life of Moses. We're going to read a few verses, but let's read Numbers chapter 20, and I'm reading from the New King James Version. Here's what the Bible says. Then the children of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month. So it's hot. And the people stayed in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. Now there was no water for the congregation. So now you think about this. It's hot outside and there is no water. So it's going to get everyone in a pretty tight mood. So they gathered together against Moses and Aaron, and the people contended with Moses and spoke, saying, if only we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. Can you hear that? It's amazing. Suicidal. Verse 4. Why have you brought up the congregation of the Lord into this wilderness or desert, that we and our animals should die here? Why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is not a place of grain or figs or vine or pomegranates. They're insinuating that the promises that Moses had made from God were lies. Watch this. Nor is there any water to drink. So Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and they fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord God appeared to them. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the rod, you and your brother Aaron, gather the assembly together, speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water. Thus you shall bring water for them out of the rock, and give drink to the congregation and their animals. So Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he had commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock, and he said to them, hear now, you rebels, must we bring water for you out of this rock? Now, is that what God told him to do? No. He did not tell him. But see, Moses is angry. In fact, in the Hebrew grammar, it's in the Kalel, which is intensive, the most intense language you can find, which implies deep anger. Verse 11, then Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their animals drank. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron. Now, the word then does not mean he right there and then spoke. I'm sure some time went by after everyone had taken care of business and everyone had cooled off. And then God comes to Moses and Aaron, and he says this in verse 12, because you did not believe me to hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel. Therefore you shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. This was the water of Meribah, which means contention. Because the children of Israel contended with the Lord, and he was hallowed among them. So now Moses in his anger has to collect later in consequences because of what he has done. What God did with Israel was to show his power and to show them that if they depended on him and had faith in him, he would provide. But Moses turned it into a personal matter and a personal battle. Tug of war between he and the people. And God says, this is not what I commanded. So as we see situations like this, they are common everywhere. And there are several causes, as we said, of anger. We spoke of guilt. We spoke of a sense of inferiority. We spoke of fear. And we spoke of traumas, all types of traumas. And we spoke of internal pain. All these are hidden causes of anger. As we can see in our text, anger can lead to serious consequences. As we said in our definitions, according to the words of the New Testament and most dictionaries and scholars, the words for anger range from displeasure to intense rage. It implies deep burning. In fact, a little term for it means glowing, as you would see a coal glow or a white heat glow. So anger, as we said, can become sin when it feeds our selfish desires and goals. We must not allow anger to fuel in our souls, because we allow it to fuel something that is usually selfish. Revenge, jealousy, and resentment are the life of anger in the different modes of expressions of human beings. And the worst part is anger can become addictive. It can make slaves out of us, and then we find ourselves out of control, no longer being able to control our anger. As I mentioned this morning, looking at statistics, I discovered some statistics that tell us that over 100 million Americans are in some kind of anger management program. So that should tell us the seriousness of the anger problem in the human soul. Anger is destructive when we feed it, as we said. Anger destroys relationships, we said. Wherever anger lives, love is injured and happiness dies. Managing anger in relationship requires a plan, a well-planned strategy. After years of struggling, we spoke of how a couple mentioned how they handled anger in their lives. They spoke of how they have to plan how they're going to manage that anger. You understand, first of all, that it does not have to have moral implications if you handle your anger correctly. That anger is to be used very carefully, and we are to manage it. We are to use ways of speaking that will bring calm to the conversation. There are ways to share our feelings without accusing and assaulting one another. And we must always find ways to give that anger time to cool off, just to cool down and recollect our sobriety and let our maturity do the speaking. And the most important thing is always make up. Pick the battles wisely. Pick the battles softly. And your instruments are love and kindness and most of all, mutual respect. When respect dies, the relationship dies. If we learn to appreciate other people and understand their position, we might not be angry at them at all. We often react to people in anger without understanding their situation. We may not have all the facts, or we might be ignorant of their context of the situation they're in. Having a positive attitude toward others and learning to respect others helps exercise self-control. Having been called to a life of truthfulness and honesty and integrity and compassion, how we treat each other is of utmost importance. And so as we think of these and we have to deal with anger, we must remember that our perspective of others will determine the way we handle our anger in relationship to others. Yours and my responsibility is to identify and understand our anger. And once we do that, we must own up to our anger. First of all, this is the first thing we must acknowledge. You and I must say, this is my anger. It doesn't belong to anyone else. It's here in me, and it's mine. Number two, we must understand that how we handle our anger is our responsibility. I have to tell myself, how I handle my anger is my responsibility. I cannot blame anyone else as to how I handle my anger. And thirdly, no one else is responsible for my anger. Now, they may do things that cause my anger, but they're not responsible for how I handle it. So we understand that anger is real. Everyone feels it. And in Mark, when Christ, in the Gospel of Mark, when Jesus was dealing with the Pharisees and healing a man with the withered hand, he asked them a simple question: is it right? Is it okay for a man to heal on the Sabbath day? Is it okay to heal on Sabbath day? And they didn't answer him. And it says, and he looked around at them in intense anger. He was angry with them. But he didn't sin. You see? So, we must understand the function of anger in our life. You must refuse to allow anger to rule over you and cause you to speak in harsh words, to react in rage or vengeance, or to harbor resentment, because it will end up in what's called a grudge, and thus you'll become a slave of a very horrible and festering emotion. And it begins with understanding the use of anger. And that is determined by the choice you and I make as to how we're going to handle anger. In Matthew chapter 12, verse 36, it says this: But I say unto you that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. For by thy words thou shalt be justified, and by thy words thou shalt be condemned. Because words always are the result of things we think and feel. So anger can be managed positively. Anger can be managed constructively if we move it to serve as a warning signal to our emotions. A warning signal in any given situation. You start feeling anger. Everyone knows when they feel anger, what you say is, this is a warning signal. I need to start getting a hold of this now. Sometimes it may mean walking away from the situation, walking away from someone. We need to take it to God and let Him work with us as we go through those crucial moments of deep anger. are taken by angry feelings, it's usually because we're allowing the non-spiritual nature in us to react based on its standards of right and wrong. We must remind ourselves that the deciding force that shapes our minds is Jesus Christ. It is His description of reality that we must depend on. And we must learn to go to Him. We must learn to let go of our self-defense. Blowing up is a selfish way of protecting and preserving oneself. We must learn better ways to feel secure in who we are and how to project ourselves in the presence and in relationship to others, especially those who are closest to us. No one has more quick access to our emotions than those who are closest to us, because there are usually no barriers there because we trust each other. This precaution will keep us from hurting, from alienating, from injuring or destroying them. We have to learn ways to feel secure without having to blow up, as one would say. We must focus on the joy of being God's children. That's the reality. We who are God's children belong to Him, and it's a beautiful situation. The beauty of that reality can be so rewarding in times of trial. Remind yourself that you have a mission and a purpose for God on this earth, and it is not blowing up with anger. This is where our sense of peace and security comes from, and it should reign in our hearts and fill every area of our lives. That's what God wants for us. John 10 verse 9, Jesus says, I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. You cannot have an abundant life if it's clogged up with anger. I want to read with you something that was written by L.J. Oligo. It's called Focusing on the Wind. It says this: self-control, the last fruit of the Spirit, speaking of Galatians 5, is the one that makes all the rest operative. Hear that again. Self-control, the last fruit of the Spirit, is the one that makes all the rest operative. To the Greek, self-control meant to have power over oneself. Strength means to have strength to control the self. We know this is not possible until we surrender to Christ's management. The sublime fruit of the Spirit is not negative, does not delineate what we are against or will not do. Rather, it consists of a very positive capacity to know who we are and what we will do, because the Spirit is in control of our abilities and aptitudes, as well as our appetites. We can have power over ourselves only when we submit it to the Spirit's control and power in us. Christ's control is in the root of our self-control. The fruit of Christ's indwelling is more than just not flying off the handle or always being Mr. Perfect or Miss Smooth. Instead, it's being centered so that all our energies, when multiplied by the Spirit, can be used creatively rather than be squandered. A person who has the fruit of self-control becomes like a wind channel in which the power of wind is channeled. It is silent strength that is focused to do what the Master requires. Self-control is that fruit of the Spirit that energizes and empowers. all the other fruit of the Spirit. So this evening, as we conclude with this. When something we desire does not happen, anger will come. Please understand that. It does come. And it will be simple or it will be complex. It depends on how you and I manage it. It comes rushing like a torrent of sea waves and leaves complete devastation. And we either learn to recover or that devastation will see itself deeper and fester into something distorted and horrid. It can prevent our spiritual transformation and destroy our ability to grow and mature both psychologically and spiritually. The apostle said, "Grieve not the Spirit." And this is absolutely an area to which it refers. Anger creates a cycle of reaction-based events in our minds, in our emotions, in our wills, and in our lives. It will assault all our relationships and twist and distort our capacity to perceive reality. When anger comes to your home, you must already have a well-planned, thought-out, and determined method on how you are going to handle anger. Because if you do not, it will always devastate you. Do not handle anger without a plan of action. You will usually have the wrong reaction and end in failure. Even when you win, you lose. When anger calls, ask yourself, at this moment, will I let Jesus shape my heart with this moment? And we will end again with these thoughts that were written, and it's called Tell Him. The little sharp vexations and the briars that cut the feet. Why not take all to the helper who has never failed us yet? Tell him about the heartache and tell him the longings too. Tell him the baffled purpose when we scarce know what to do. Then, leaving all our weakness with the one divinely strong, forget that we bore the burden and carry away the song. That's called victory over anger. I've been so disappointed, not only with myself many times, but with others who call themselves children of God. You see, anger has a powerful way of manipulating and rationalizing our situation. So in closing, we want to ask, what is your struggle today? How are you handling anger today? Have you taken that device? Have you taken it to the cross? Did it really get crucified with Jesus when you took his child? Have you given your life to Jesus truly and really and completely? We want to encourage you to do that today.